It's my great pleasure to introduce to you today's speaker, Lisa Beamer. No doubt you became familiar with Lisa after 9/11, when she emerged as the strong and courageous young wife of Todd Beamer of Flight 93. Her dignity, authenticity, and reliance on her faith touched us all. People have often asked me if I was surprised at how poised Lisa was following the events of that horrible day. And my honest answer has always been no. You see, Lisa didn't just pull her faith out of her back pocket when tragedy hit. She didn't just then decide to trust God with her life. She had been living a life of faithful trust all along. I met Lisa when we were 18 years old, wide-eyed freshmen at Wheaton College. And I had no idea then that the blonde girl from New York who lived down the hall from me in Fisher Dorm would become my lifelong treasured friend. We studied different disciplines at Wheaton. Lisa was working towards a degree in economics, and I was in the sociology department. But we found we had many common passions and interests. We spent countless afternoons over coffee and muffins discussing our lives, faith, and dreams for the future. Lisa is a unique blend of both head and heart, and these conversations were enormously enriching to me. Our relationship has only grown over the years since college, and Lisa is still a person I turn to for thoughtful conversation about important matters and for wise advice. For Lisa, actions speak louder than words, and her hands-on commitment to social justice is a continual inspiration. For the past 9 years, Lisa has worked at Arm in Arm, a social service agency in Trenton, New Jersey, dedicated to meeting the basic needs of the low-income community it serves. Lisa specifically works to promote stable housing for individuals and families. Her years in this field have been an education on the array of obstacles faced by those whose income is limited by underemployment or disability. And while she acknowledges there are no easy answers, she finds engagement with this resilient community to be a hopeful endeavor and one she cherishes as a life work. Lisa is a resident of Central New Jersey. In her personal time, she delights in daily adventures with her 2 teenage children still living at home, keeping up with the Wheaton College football team, on which her son is the sophomore quarterback, and early morning walks with her dogs. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Lisa Beamer.
Thank you, Sandy. I didn't think I was going to tear up today, but. My name is Lisa Beamer, and I'm very honored to spend this afternoon with you. Last spring, when I got a note in the mail from Outreach, I opened it, and I wasn't too thrilled to be invited to speak here today, because it's not something I typically do anymore. But I love Sandy with all my heart, and I followed her work here at Outreach. I guess you've been here, 15 years now? And it's just, I know, an agency that has many aspects of it that are near and dear to me. So I love Sandy, I love Outreach, so here I am. I'm also here for the North Central game tomorrow. Anyway, it is a privilege for us all to be here today, to celebrate and to invest in the work of an agency that does so many amazing things. I don't even know how to follow up what I just heard from you, Danny. You know, I could talk about outcomes and we can talk about statistics, but there's no better way for us to understand the value that outreach brings than for you to be vulnerable and tell your story today. So I would love to hear from everyone, but you spoke so beautifully for the residents of Jubilee Village and Hawthorne House, and we appreciate it. Thank you. This past August, I received a text on my phone. There was a link entitled "County Sheriff's Officers Seize Gun from Juvenile." When I clicked, a short article opened up. This is what it said. The county sheriff announced that yesterday, at approximately 10:30 a.m., patrol officers responded to the 400 block on a report of gun possession. Upon their arrival, the sheriff's officers observed a male juvenile, matching a description provided to police. The juvenile, 16, was found to be in possession of a Glock 9mm handgun. in addition to 3 magazines loaded with 9mm bullets, one of which contained hollow point bullets. The weapon was also fitted with a tactical red laser aiming device. The quick work of the patrol units resulted in one more lethal weapon being taken off our streets, said the sheriff. Our patrol units work hand in hand with the police department to help take dangerous guns off the streets and out of the hands of juveniles, he added. The gun was clear on NCIC, and its origin at this time is unknown. The juvenile, who awaits a hearing, was released into parental custody after being fitted with an ankle monitoring bracelet. By the time I read the article, a number of comments had already been posted. Great job. Hats off to our sheriff's office. Kudos to these 2 officers for apprehending a dangerous individual and taking him off our streets. Job well done. Good work, gentlemen. Way to go. One reader wisely posted that she was thankful no one was hurt. I agreed wholeheartedly with appreciation for those officers who had put themselves in harm's way as they sought to serve and protect. That morning, they wisely diffused a frightening scenario which could have ended much differently. Even so, I had an entirely different response to the article. I was heartbroken. I was scared and I was confused about what to do next. The reason? The juvenile in custody was my friend's son. I know him. I've watched him grow. I've seen him overcome obstacles, and I have hopes and dreams for him. To me, he isn't a juvenile in possession of a handgun. He's Luis. I know that his mother grew up in a dysfunctional household, which left her vulnerable to an array of abuse. I know that she became pregnant at 15 while struggling to get out from under that life. I know that she and Luis spent his toddler years in a homeless shelter because they had nowhere else to go. I know that she is smart and resilient beyond words, and somehow cobbled a sketchy education into a professional career in social services. I know that even so, she and her children live just above the poverty line. I know that with uncanny predictability, at least once a year, a struggle comes which threatens to knock down her carefully built but still precarious life. 3 years ago, for example, while on the way home from work, an uninsured driver ran into her car at an intersection, leaving her with a totaled vehicle and no restitution. Weeks without reliable transportation put her job in jeopardy, and she likely would have been let go had a coworker not loaned her money to buy a cheap used car. More recently, when one of her sons went to live with his father, one less dependent in her household meant she no longer qualified for Medicaid, and thus resulting in losing her access to $1-a-day state-subsidized auto insurance as well. She was suddenly forced to shop for market-rate car insurance and pay medical copays, which broke her budget. It was one of 2 times I've seen her cry as she struggled to find a solution that didn't involve telling her 10-year-old daughter she couldn't go to the sleepaway camp that she'd been promised. I know that my friend loves her children fiercely, and that she fights a never-ending battle to maximize their education in an underperforming urban school district. I know that she scours Groupons to find fun day trips for her family on the weekends, because the parks in her neighborhood feel neither clean nor safe. I know that her home is immaculate. Her children understand that chores come before play, and their favorite family night is making homemade pizza together. I know that Luis is a 16-year-old boy everywhere, is a 16-year-old boy who, like 16-year-old boys everywhere, is struggling to know what it means to be a man, how to harness his pain, and how to conquer his fears. I know that, like 16-year-old boys everywhere, his impulsivity led him to do a really stupid thing back in August. I know that the day after the incident, at his hearing, his mom could only watch as he was arraigned and sent immediately to a juvenile detention facility. I know that now he must wait to know his sentence, wait to figure out how to resume his education, how to reconnect with his family, and how to redeem his life. I know, too, that this is not the end for Luis, and that good people have come around his mom to build a safety net as she supports him. I wonder if some of the comments left by the others who read the article might have had a different tone if they knew Luis like I do, or even if they knew someone like him. You see, knowing leads to understanding and compassion. Knowing pushes away prejudice, judgment, and indifference. And that changes everything. Knowing transforms how we think and what we want. It shifts what we believe to be true, and it enhances what we have to give. Jesus always served from a position of knowing. How many times did he stop someone in their tracks with a question or a comment that went straight to their heart? To the rich young ruler who asked him how to achieve eternal life, Jesus said, "Go and sell all you possess and give it to the poor." Jesus knew the man's priorities and where the fork in the road needed to be set for him. To Nicodemus, the Pharisee who wondered if Jesus just might be the Son of God, Jesus said, "No one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." He knew the Pharisees' legalism would have no frame of reference for this graceful idea, and that Nicodemus would take that intriguing bait and want to know more. To his loyal but impulsive disciple Peter, he asked, "Who do you think I am?" He knew Peter's opportunity to publicly proclaim, "You are the Messiah," would buoy him later in his shame at having denied Jesus during his night of need, and validate his leadership of the first ever Christian church. Maybe the story where Jesus most artfully uses his knowing to birth life change is when he meets the biblical character we know as the woman at the well. The account unfolds in John 4 as a tired Jesus sits alone at a village well in Samaria. A woman comes to draw water, and Jesus asks her for a drink. "Why are you asking me?" she says. We know that her sex and her ethnicity put her at the bottom of the social power ladder. I wonder if she was feeling wary as she was approached by this strange man who easily could have taken advantage of her without fear of consequence. Or maybe she was tired herself and didn't have the energy to take care of one more thing for one more person that afternoon. Anyone been there? I prefer to assume she was spunky. "Dude, you've got 2 arms, draw your own drink." Regardless, Jesus' response turns the table on her. If you only knew the gift that God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water. Huh? I would ask you? Living water? Buddy, you don't even have a bucket. How can you make this offer? Is her reply. She'd clearly been sold a bill of goods a time or two before and was not playing games. Jesus then ups the ante. "Anyone who drinks this water will become thirsty again, but those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." Now he's got her attention. "I want that," she responds gleefully, at the very least, perhaps envisioning a life free of trips to the well. But then Jesus pulls another wild card. "Go and get your husband," he says. Awkward. I don't have a husband," she mumbles. Jesus, the all-knowing one, takes her one further. "You're right. You've had 5, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now." I wonder which flashes in her mind first. That familiar shame of being judged for the revolving door on her bedroom? Or the shock of realizing that she just might be in the presence of something that's supernatural? To her credit, she digs right into the possibility that this man might have answers to some of her big questions. Jesus begins to explain to this dear woman, as he calls her, that salvation is for all who worship the Father in spirit and in truth, a very hopeful message for a Samaritan. And eventually, he reveals to her that he himself is the Messiah. At that, she runs to bring the rest of the villagers to meet him, and through their honest exchange at the well, John tells us that many Samaritans believed. Jesus knew. He knew her story. He knew her fears. He knew her burdens. He knew the risks she took and why. He knew how to respond to her questions, and he knew how to steer her towards faith. As Christ followers, we understand that Jesus served from a platform of love, but we should see from his interactions that at the core of that loving service is knowing. We can't serve well who we don't know well. Jesus did have that superpower we call omniscience, which gave him a leg up in the knowing department. But even without omniscience, we can and must acknowledge that our love needs to be driven by knowing too. Our knowing will never be as clear or as quick as his, but without seeking to know, our love will fall short of our disciples' charter to be Christ's hands and feet while we live in this world. Jesus shows us that the catalyst for miraculous life change is what I'll call knowing love, a concept that's simple but not easy. To say that to be like Christ, we need to be engaged and informed givers is a no-brainer. But to actually do it, that's another story. Knowing is hard work. It takes time. It costs resources. It requires examining and putting aside pride and agendas. It means putting my own skin in the game. It's risky. I think this is why, even with big hearts, we need to vigilantly examine our blind spots, places where we may be missing needs altogether, and places where we may be interpreting opportunities to serve incorrectly. I remember as a teenager sometimes giving the snarky response, "Don't know, don't care," to express my utter disinterest in whatever was being discussed. I wondered if this 80s phrase was still a thing, so I Googled, and yes, sadly, the expression lives on. I even found charming t-shirts and bumper stickers for sale online. The thought of boldly proclaiming to the world that I neither know nor care just feels wrong. But the reality is, I'm constantly tempted to tunnel into my own world of cares and joys at the expense of raising my eyes to anyone else in my sphere. Sometimes I may as well be wearing the "Don't Know, Don't Care" t-shirt as I bustle around, driven by activities popping up on my Google Calendar, on a mission that does not involve being sidetracked by someone else's need, especially a need that doesn't come blaring at me with bells and whistles. I'm from New Jersey, and we've earned our reputation as people who don't mince words. So I'll be blunt and refer to this state as oblivious ignorance. Not pretty words, but accurate to describe the truth that what I see of the world and what Jesus sees are often very different. Have you ever used night vision goggles? Well, neither have I, but I have seen movies where a character uses them to filter out everything but the important targets, leaving little red images floating around, lit up against the dark night to be either caught or avoided. It's a challenge to think what I would notice and what would fade if I could slip on the goggles of Jesus' knowing love. What would change as I peruse through my daily agenda? What would change as I develop my family budget? What would change in my priorities for my children? What would change as I strategize about the next phase of my life? If I could see what Jesus sees, I'm pretty sure that a whole lot would change. I'm involved with an organization which does development work in a small Haitian town. Our leader is famous for this tagline when he's recruiting project volunteers. He says, "The heart can't feel what the eyes don't see." The truth is, I often neglect my mission simply because I don't see it. Sometimes I miss an obvious need because my gaze is elsewhere. Sometimes I count the cost and intentionally look away before a need gets too close. And some needs are so well hidden that I would never see them without a long, costly search, which doesn't fit into my busy life. Whatever the reason, when my lack of knowing causes a connection to be missed, an opportunity for loving service to be squandered, and someone to potentially go on needing, I am guilty of oblivious ignorance. Another potentially even more destructive state of not knowing is when I think I know, but I don't. I'll call this vain benevolence. This happens when I am engaged with the need, but I am operating from my own assumptions, certain that my truth is the truth. I guess, I stereotype, I judge, I predict outcomes, all in my own mind. This allows me to choose to act or not to act on my own terms. I unilaterally decide what, when, and how I will give because I think I know. An article in the Harvard Business Review entitled, "Do You Know What You Don't Know?" captured the reality that human nature is to credit ourselves with understanding much more than we actually do. The author notes that an undiagnosed gap in knowledge means you might not fully understand a problem, and that can hinder innovative solutions. Well, we could say that this is only human. When it comes to serving, not knowing what I don't know is at best a waste, and at worst can be downright harmful. But because vain benevolence is usually quick and safe, and it feels pretty darn good, it tends to be a popular response. When confronted with an obvious need, I'll be honest, my first reaction is usually to mentally sift through what I already have going on to figure out what I have left over to give. I get the giver's high and maybe do a little good, but by doling out my leftovers and my extras at arm's length, I really don't look anything at all like Christ in the process. A recent example of the vain benevolence trap was some of the help which flowed to Texas in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. While the waters were still rising, pictures began popping up on social media of cheerful volunteers in sunny northern states packing 18-wheelers with donations of used clothes and household items. Contrasting those smiling selfies with towns so devastated that transportation out was the only immediate priority, there was a clear disconnect between the giving and the needing. Sure enough, a few days later, a Texas woman wrote a heartfelt and gracious letter which circulated the internet, begging people to think before donating, because the misplaced love was actually hindering recovery efforts. She noted that hundreds of precious man and woman hours are being spent receiving, sorting, bagging, and stacking these items instead of mucking houses and feeding babies. The unusable items are filling up our resource and rescue centers, leaving little room for the things we really need right now. And sadly, many of these items will end up in landfills, which are already bursting at the seams. She encouraged people to reach out to established national and local aid groups who know the area and understand the needs, and then follow their directions to ensure that future gifts are good gifts. A good heart is no excuse for bad service. Oblivious ignorance, vain benevolence, they're strong words, but they're concepts that are worth examining because they're common human pitfalls that limit our ability to serve like Jesus. They waste resources and they leave needs unmet. Scrutinizing where I need to see more or where I need to understand better in order to practice knowing love is integral to Christ's call to be his hands and feet. If you only knew, Jesus' words to the woman at the well, if you only knew who I was and what I have for you, you'd rush to me and I'd show you a new way to live. If you only knew. My friend's words to people who judge her son as a statistic and her as another unsuccessful single mom. If you only knew the barriers that poverty and racism and broken systems have put into our lives, your heart would break and you'd see places where you could help make things better for us. If you only knew. The flood victim's words to her fellow Americans. If you only knew what it's like to lose everything, you'd stop taking selfies and start researching aid organizations. If I only knew. If I only knew the needs, the stories, the opportunities to engage which surround me right now, what would I do differently? How would I be changed? It's a question worth asking ourselves over and over again. I love the name you've chosen for your organization, Hearts of Grace. It represents the concept of kindness that is wise, love that knows, and giving that is selfless. This room is filled with women committed to offering good gifts, women dedicated to doing excellent service, women who want to know more so they can love better. The women of Hearts of Grace recognize that DuPage County is in need of people who see, people who care enough to take the time to understand, people who share burdens so that no one walks alone, people who realize that the woman behind them in line at the Jewel, the parent at the next desk on back to school night, the waitress who brings their breakfast, may be in need of someone to see their vulnerability and then invest in their family. Many of you know these stories up close and personal with faces and names attached. And your personal engagement has brought life change. You see patterns too, and you work to educate yourselves on the systematic issues which create barriers for the poor and at risk in our country of plenty. You have friends whose stories don't match yours at all, and you realize you both have much to learn from sharing your lives. You understand that knowing is at the root of loving service, and you've intentionally partnered with Outreach Community Ministries, which practices this at the very heart of its mission. You know your investment in their transitional housing and family resource centers allow you to take your influence as Christ's hands and feet even further than you ever could on your own. You could not find an organization better at living out knowing love than Outreach. Their transitional housing programs at Jubilee Village and Hawthorne House are the very definition of producing life change from a position of knowing. The young women who call these places home for a few years are met with a deep and wide approach by the Outreach team. Their stories are known, their needs are examined, their burdens are shared, and a customized path to stability and independence is built, including everything from education geared towards employment, to financial literacy, to family building skills, to reliable transportation, to long-term plans for affordable housing, to opportunities to grow in their faith if they so choose. As someone who works with people facing eviction every day, I can attest to the reality that stumbling in any one of these areas is typically a slippery slope to disaster for a lower-income family. By addressing every area of vulnerability and giving tools that last a lifetime, Outreach's transitional living programs are unsurpassed in leading clients to long-term stability. So it's not surprising that 85% of participants successfully graduate with their goals met. In the social service industry, it's typical for only 56% of clients to come to completion, meaning that 44% of those individuals drop off along the way, many being no better off than they were before dollars and hours were poured into their cases. Perhaps the best testament to knowing love, which Outreach practices, is the open door for graduates, like Danny, to maintain relationship with the agency over the course of their lives. I love the stories I've heard of women who look at Outreach employees as surrogate mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles, and faithfully maintain these bonds long after their requirements to Outreach are finished. The Family Resource Centers are another place where knowing love takes programs and turns them into people shapers. The Family Resource Centers are not buildings, they're community anchors. The centers provide a complete range of growth and support opportunities for individuals and families from cradle to grave. 100% of the children who attend the after-school programs through high school can expect to graduate. The tutoring and college preparation services offered are important, but the mentoring component shapes each student's character for life. The staff and volunteers invest the time to not only teach the child, but to understand the needs at home too, opening access to financial and legal resources to buoy a family during a period of vulnerability, or providing sliding scale counseling services to build healthy living for the entire household. If it was cheap and easy to do what Outreach does, every agency would be as successful at producing life change for their clients. The reality is that Outreach's model, while it consistently produces the best outcomes in the state of Illinois, is expensive. Though they successfully compete for public funds every year, public funds are not the anchor that Outreach needs to provide the comprehensive wraparound support used to bring true independence and healthy long-term lives to their clients. At Jubilee Village, for example, only 35% of the $20,000 annual per-client cost is met through public funds. The rest comes from people like us, people who don't want to be obliviously ignorant or vainly benevolent, but people who understand that the needs are great and that transformation requires personal investment that is deep and wide. People who appreciate that their resources are not their own, but they are to be poured out with knowing love as Jesus showed us. I truly am honored today to have had the opportunity to speak on behalf of Outreach to a room full of wise and generous women who are determined to bring transformation to at-risk families in DuPage County. It's exciting and even overwhelming to consider the possibilities for knowing love which could erupt and have erupted from this group, sending ripple effects far and wide for generations to come. I'll end with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., which reminds us that our orientation is the first and perhaps most important stage of our service. Dr. King said, "The first question which the priest and the Levite asked was, 'If I stop to help this man, what will happen to me?' But the Good Samaritan reversed the question. 'If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him?' May we continually grow in the knowing love and wise service to which we have been called. Thank you.